Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. While pendulums were introduced in the Duelist Alliance, I think they really hit their stride in Clash of Rebellions. Sure, the first year of Pendulum's core sets had cliff forts, but they felt less like a pendulum deck and more like a Monarch-esque deck that had a mechanic to help them get some free, effective tribute fodder. Sure, it did technically involve pendulum summoning, but it just ended up feeling like triggering a bunch of tree-born frogs. It lacked the flair, the pizzazz, that certain je ne sais quoi that made the mechanics such a sight to behold. Suffice it to say, cliff forts are not a Yuya approved deck. But Clash of Rebellion and the year of core sets to follow marked the next step of the mechanics design. Ignites focused on destroying themselves to set up searches, only to use pendulum summoning to get back all the cards they lost to build big boards. Magispectors focused on the on-summon part of the mechanic, gaining advantage every time they were brought back, making them very tenacious foes. And Dimorphages, well, you already know how I feel about them. But my favorite theme to come out of this cycle is definitely Dinomist. They're certainly one of the more aggressive strategies of the bunch, but they have a number of defensive and stun tricks at their disposal without losing any of their offensive focus. In fact, I would say they're the strategy most like the next Ancient Guardian set we'll be covering, Doremichords, and I think it'll be helpful to have some context on how a theme like this can work before covering them in earnest. So let's do some automaton archaeology to catalog these Cretaceous creations, study them in their natural habitat to discern their playstyle, and spare no expense with additions that can help us out. It's time to blow off some steam with Dinomist. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 5,000 subs and you can help make it happen. Once we reach that lofty goal, I'll be making Heroes Explained, covering everything from Contrast Hero Chaos to Extra Hero Wonder Driver, and every related monster, spell, and trap in between. We've also got our Discord, where you know I had to explain it to him, and a Twitter where you can stay up to date on channel news and my bad takes. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So what's the deal with Dinomists? Well, they're a series of water attribute machine pendulum monsters whose scales are 3 or 6, which is very convenient since all of them are either levels 4 or 5. They also all share a pendulum effect depending on their scale. For the scale 3s, if any number of your other Dinomist cards you control would be destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effect, you can destroy the scale 3 instead. The scale 6s, once while they're face up in the pendulum zone, can negate an activated effect that targets any number of your Dinomist cards you control, and then the scale is destroyed. This means that a complete scale gives your team some temporary defenses against targeting and destruction, which is a nice touch when you're on the beatdown. It should also be noted that none of these effects actually activate. The scale 3s are a destruction replacement effect, and the scale 6s negate on resolution. So your opponent can't count on using activation negation to stop it, they're just going to have to remove it before they become a problem. Let's start with our level 4s. Dinomist Ankylos is a scale 6 with 1500 attack and 2000 defense, and any monster that's destroyed by battle with your Dinomists is banished. Not Ankylos, any Dinomist. This adds a pretty threatening layer to any of your pendulum summons, especially against opposing pendulum strategies and graveyard reliant decks. For example, every deck that I like. And while pendulum summoning isn't what it used to be, pairing them up with just one chonky attacker is all that it can take to banish your opponent's game plan to the Jurassic period. Dinomist Plesiosaurus is a scale 6 with 1700 attack and 1400 defense, and while they're on the field, all face-up monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for every Dinomist card you control. That means monsters, the continuous spells and traps that we'll get into, and your pendulum scales. This is one of those incremental effects that gets really scary really fast, because nothing's stopping you from having more than one Plesiosaurus on the field. And while sometimes the debuff is only 300 or 400 points, every bit can be the difference between your board getting broken and your opponent's getting watered down. Dinomist Terran is a scale 3 with 1800 attack and 1200 defense, and when they destroy an opponent's monster by battle, you can add a Dinomist card from your deck to your hand. This works really well with Plesiosaurus, helping to take down bigger threats and giving you even more advantage for it, and considering the kinds of cards Terran gives you access to, it's well worth it. Normally, I'm not a fan of effects like these, having to wait until the battle phase, and then having to get over a monster before you get any value, but for Terran, I'll let it fly. Our last level 4 is Dinomist Stegosaur. They're scale 3 with 1600 attack and 1800 defense, and if any other pendulum monster you control battles an opponent's monster, after damage calculation, you can destroy both monsters. Now, this effect is really cool. Ankylos is great for when you have a commanding presence on the board attack-wise, but Stegosaur lets you use your monster attacks as removal when you're not in control. It doesn't even specify Dinomists, so any pendulum you can splash in can take advantage of it. Next, we have our level 5s, and I'm going to lump our first two together because they're functionally the same card. Dinomist Brachion is a scale 6 with 2000 attack and 800 defense, and you can special summon them from your hand if you don't already control a Brachion, and your opponent has a monster on the field with the highest attack, even if it's tied with one of your monsters. Dinomist Ceratops is a scale 3 with 2100 attack and 400 defense, and if you don't already control a Ceratops and all the monsters you control are Dinomists, minimum 1, you can special summon them from your hand. So functionally, both of them are free special summons from the hand under certain conditions, but the question here is, why do pendulum monsters have their effects wasted on just being ways to special summon them and not something more useful like our level 4s? I mean, we already have pendulum summoning, right? Well, I would argue that it helps to keep you playing, even if you don't have complete scales. Some of the worst things about pendulum archetypes with high-level monsters is that if your opponent keeps you off your scales, you just can't play. But Brachion and Ceratops help to alleviate that by not being entirely dependent on those scales, helping to make your deck run like a well-oiled machine. Continuing on with our level 5s, we have Dinomist Rex. They're a scale 6 with 2400 attack and 2200 defense, and after they've attacked at the end of the damage step, you contribute another Dinomist monster to activate one of two effects. You can either have Rex attack another monster, but this time with piercing, or you can shuffle a random card in your opponent's hand or any card on their field into the deck, then Rex gains a permanent 100 attack boost. What I don't necessarily like about this is that it's kind of a nombo with Ankylos and Plesio's if you tribute them to continue attacking, but if you just spin a card and stop attacking, then it doesn't much matter, especially if you just pendulum summon back the monsters you tributed. In fact, Rex really emphasizes what the pendulum mechanic does for the theme. Proper use of it will give Rex a whole bunch of bonuses, and then you still get to keep your field presence. What a terribly useful lizard. Dinomist Spinos is a scale 3 with 2500 attack and 1800 defense. Like Rex, Spinos contribute Dinomist monsters for effects, but you activate them during your main phase 1 instead of your battle phase. You can either have Spinos attack directly that turn, attack twice that turn, or if you activate it twice, both. Yeah, that's 5,000 points of direct damage, and that's pretty funny if your opponents resolve the Solemn Judgment that game. Spinos is the real terror of the deck. At the drop of a hat, you can potentially end the game, so your opponent's gonna have to keep their shields up at all times, lest they leave themselves vulnerable to Spinos bursting out of the water to take a huge chunk out of their life points, which is a pretty spineless play if I'm being honest. Alright, now it's time for the spells and traps. Dinomist Charge is a continuous spell that's kind of like our Fire Formation Tenki. It searches you a Dinomist on activation, and once per turn if any number of Dinomist cards are added from the field to your extra deck face up, you can add one of those sent cards to your hand. This card adds consistency and longevity to the deck. While adding back the card was previously more important for keeping our scales intact after they got busted, with the advent of Master Rule 5, it's doubly important for helping with our pendulum summons proper. While you're limited to the amount of monsters you can special summon from the extra deck, the amount of monsters you can summon from your hand has no such restrictions, and considering the amount of helpful passive effects you can get from them, it's a great way to turbocharge your plays. Dinomist Rush is one of my favorite cards in the theme. It's a normal trap that summons any Dinomist from your deck, and it is destroyed during the end phase, but it does become unaffected by every other card's effect while it's on the field. So if you just need a blocker to survive a turn, another attacker to close out games, or just add another effect to your board like Ankylos or Plesio's, then this card has your back until they explode. And because they're pendulum monsters, they won't be gone for long. I mean, have you ever resolved this card? It's quite a rush. Dynamic Power Load is a field spell that grants all your Dinomists a 300 attack and defense boost, and shuts off your opponent's ability to activate cards or effects whenever your Dinomists attack until the end of the damage step. Now, I've already gone into how much I love Armade's effects like this before, but to keep it short and sweet for here, as long as you have effects that activate during that window, they're gonna resolve without a hitch because your opponent can't respond to them. But the problem is that it doesn't do anything to advance your strategy, so you don't want to play too many copies. It would make for a decent searchable one-of as a way to secure a game-winning push, but it suffers from laughs. And because I know you've all gone to the latest medical applications of Trading Card Game Symposium, I know I don't have to explain and that's short for Lore Archetype Field Spell Syndrome, and it refers to the fact that just about every field spell in the Draco Slayer storyline isn't actually name-stamped as part of the theme, making it an illegal target for any searcher the theme has, so I'm not gonna. Dinomist Eruption is probably the only card in the theme I just don't like. It's a normal trap that can be activated when any number of your Dinomist monsters are destroyed by battle or card effect, and it lets you target a card on the field and destroy it. Now, Pendulum monster cards being destroyed is as common as Burning Abyss players milling terrible cards, or Alistair Stands opening Invocation. The activation timing isn't an issue, it happens all the time. But the issue is that Eruption doesn't check for Dinomist monster cards, it checks for Dinomist monsters, meaning that it can't be used in retaliation of your own pendulum scales being destroyed, either by your opponent or their own effects. So the only things in your deck that can trigger them is Rush when it wears off, and Stegosaur. And I guess by proxy that means anytime you smash a Dinomist into your opponent's monster, but all of that isn't very proactive. I like to use my removal before the battle phase, thank you very much, so at that point I'd rather just have the evenly matched. And you know, not for nothing, but it also shows Brachion violently exploding for no reason, and no one wants to see that. What we do want to see is probably the best card in the entire theme, and that's Dinomist Howling. It's a continuous trap that, when activated, allows you to set 1 or 2 Dinomists from your deck to your Pendulum Zone, but you're locked out of Pendulum summoning anything until the end of your next turn, save for Dinomist monsters. So don't think you can be clever, like I did, thinking you can activate this on your opponent's turn to avoid that restriction. We're playing by Dogmatica punishment rules here. But thankfully, it doesn't lock out any other kind of summon, so it's not that bad. Also, once per turn, if Howling is already face up in the spell and trap zone, you can tribute a Dinomist you control and target a card your opponent controls and bounce it to the hand. That's right, we've got a repeatable, compulsory evacuation device for any card that can be targeted, great for blanking recently set back row during the end phase, and being hard removal against extra deck monsters. I really wish it didn't have its restrictions though. I suppose the first one is to keep any other Pendulum strategy with similar levels from having a 1-card scale that's slower than Pendulum Call, and the already face up in the spell and trap zone part is to keep it from retaliating if your opponent tries to pop it immediately after it's revealed. These drawbacks just seem arbitrary to ensure that Dinomist doesn't accidentally become some kind of tiered threat, and that kind of indignancy really has me howling. So that's all for the Dinomist cards, but what do we do with them? Well, big monsters with big battle effects means we are full-time aggro. We want to swarm and strike for Buku's damage as soon as possible without giving our opponent time to make any Jurassic Park references. But what can we add to help them out? They aren't part of the theme proper, so I didn't add it previously, but it is connected via lore, so I'd be remiss if I didn't include Dinoster Power, the mighty Draco Slayer, and yeah, it's hella useful. While Luster's scale is a lackluster, Masters fits just fine, and Dinoster will help keep your scale safe whenever Twin Twisters is making waves in a format. Though, don't expect it to help now. It stops destruction, but not targeting, so thanks, Cosmic Cyclone. This is one of the few machine decks that I feel warrants the usage of limiter removal. A lot of them are already stupid good at the beatdown like Cyber Dragons and Trains, but a Spinos with all the fixins plus limiter removal is 10,000 points of direct attacking damage. It's also one of those cards that scales exponentially the more monsters you have, and you know, we are a Pendulum theme. It's just a shame that it's limited to 1, so it's not very consistent.
Oh bother. Sir, you may wish to double check your data. Limiter removal is currently unlimited.
What? Since when?
January of 2019, as it turns out, and I must say I'm rather fond of the change. I've never felt so spry. Nothing like the unlocking of your speedometer to make one feel like a prototype again.
Huh. Good for them. Also, we've got level 5 machines, and that means Cyber Dragon Infinity access. And you know me, I can't pass up the opportunity to run a card with Nova in its name. CDI isn't as threatening as it was in the Breakers of Shadow days, but Dinomists lack any good turn 1 plays, so at least you have a single Omni Negate to help you out. Now, if only our Dinomist pendulums protected any machine monster. Rescue Hamster is a pretty good candidate for inclusion here as well. All of your pendulums are level 5 and under, so if you have enough monsters left in your deck to activate, it can provide the materials for CDI, as well as other rank 4s like Gear Gigant X for a search, or Tornado Dragon for back row removal. You can even make Link 2s with it, probably the most appropriate for the theme being Clifford Genius. It negates troublesome cards and can search you a level 5 Dinomist after you pendulum summon. It can also help you link climb into what I feel is one of the most important extra deck monsters you can use, Zephyra Metaltron. I will not go on a lore rant right now. Importantly, as a pendulum deck, you need link arrows now more than ever, and since we don't have an in-archetype monster that can help with that, Zephyra is here to pick up the slack. 3 down arrows makes for very profitable pendulum summons, can help you recover resources when your opponent goes to smash your dinos, and can clear the way for your attacks by banishing extra deck summoned monsters. It's very narrow and temporary removal, I admit, but we're playing it for the arrows, not for the effect. Well, alternatively, we could just bite the bullet and play Luster Pendulum. Scales be damned, we can still use it to make Halqifibrax, summon Effect Veiler, then make Selene. Heck, adding Luster also gives you access to all the Draco Slayer extra deck monsters, but that takes committing a bit more main deck space to the combo, so I would recommend going with whichever Link 3 suits your particular build best. As for a silly tech pick, I think Pendulum Paradox would be a nice spell to add. I would say Pendulum Switch, but since we have to share the Pendulum zones with the spell and trap zones, we can't really afford the room. Especially since we already have a continuous spell and trap we want to be playing. Paradox doesn't stick around, and while it's going to add 2 monsters of the same scale, so no 1-card scale formation here, we do need to add as many of these Misty Mechs to our hand as possible to optimize our Pendulum summons. And that's all I've got to say about Dinomists. They have some very strong, straightforward gameplay that looks to shut out a game as soon as possible with some good old big monster smash tactics, but looking at it in context of the game as it is now, it's going to be struggling. It lacks the kind of explosive 1-card starters that gets you into the game as quickly as other decks, and even when it does get its engines going, its ceiling is actually quite low. You're great at punching a hole in your opponent's life points, but not much else. You don't have the repeatability and oppressiveness of an Eldritch Variance back row, the instant win button of a bird up deck, or the versatility of Virtual World. But despite all that, it's still super fun to play, especially when it comes to harnessing that Dino DNA.
No, bad Nova.
No.
They're machines,
Delilah,
not
stop.
dinosaurs, and that also means they don't have DNA. Get your act together.
Anyway, now I'd like to hear what you all have to say. Do you all agree that Dinomist still needs an overhaul, or are they already the apex predator? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video around. It really does a lot to help me out. And if you want to see any more Draco Slayer related content, you can follow this link to see my video all about the lore of the Draco Slayer storyline. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.